No, I lost it.
Okay, I will call to order the Town of Rome Joint Community Development Authority and Plan Commission Subcommittee meeting for Tuesday, November 8th, 2022 at 2:30 p.m. We'll do roll call and we'll start with Supervisor Goldman.
Goldman here.
Baker.
Capel.
Schermerhorn.
We also have Zoning Administrator Emily Zeddies and Town Attorney Nicholas Flanagan. Can I get a certification of the posting of the meeting?
The agenda for the November 8th joint CDA and Plan Commission Subcommittee meeting was posted at the following locations on November 4th, 2022. Rome Municipal Building at 3:41 p.m., Quick Trip at 3:59 p.m., Inclusive Port Edward State Bank at 4:27 p.m. It was emailed to the Wisconsin Daily Tribune at 12:40 p.m. and it was emailed to the town website at 12:46 p.m.
Can I have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Number 5, citizen comments. We didn't receive any comment cards, so we'll dispense with the reading of number 5. No action contemplated except for possible referral to future agenda. Number 6, information updates, recent correspondence, current events, and announcements. Does anyone have anything to share? It is election day in town hall, so if I have to get up and excuse myself for a moment or two, no worries. Just lots happening today. Great voter turnout today. Discussion and possible action on the following items. Number 7, discussion and possible action on the meeting minutes from July 26, 2022, August 9th, 2022, and September 11th, 2022. Could I have a motion for those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Corrections, changes? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item number 8, discussion of possible action, review of map 8, existing land use, and map 9, future land use. Emily's got some great maps to walk us through today that she's been working with North Central and the county on. I'll let her take it away.
Yeah, so we have 5 new maps on top of our zoning map, future land use and existing land use. So what should be the 4th map in your pile is future land use, and then this is, I just highlighted and indicated where all this changes from the suggestions from previous meetings. So I kinda added to the legend on the right. So the colored red on top of the red, that's where we indicated business, commercial, and then striped blue would be outdoor recreation, and then striped orange was rural residential. And then so just to review them all right away, the draft 1 of the future land use map, which was next in that pile, this shows all R4 and R5 zoning as rural residential, where previously rural residential was just indicated as R5. So this is showing zoning on the future land use map, not like indicated future land use, but it gives you an idea of where all the rural residential is currently. And then,
Just one,
yep.
so just so I'm clear, the draft 1 is our current zoning superimposed over the future land use map?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you look at the map 9 with suggestions from previous meetings, that's just showing where rural residential, just like that gold color, where it was on our map.
Yep.
As a future land use, not as a zoning map. So you
Okay,
kinda gotta look at 3 maps at once if you wanna compare and contrast with the zoning, the future land use, and this draft 1.
thank you.
Okay, so draft 2, this map is kinda shows an overlay with that, rural residential remaining the same with the overlay of the future land use. So the biggest part that you see from this is the, southeast corner with that, preservation land use over top of a lot of that rural residential zoning.
Repeat that one more time.
So, this is the exact same map as draft one, but it's configured where some of the land use is over top of that rural residential zoning that was added to that draft one. The layers don't, cause this is, I'm just asking him to kind of overlap layers. He didn't make any additional layers, so they don't totally work with each other, which is why it's a little bit messy. So it's showing kind of both the future land use with that rural residential in one, but it's not, I mean, it's land use and zoning, so you can't really show both at once. And then these last two maps are straight from the comp plan. I just thought it would be very helpful to show where the woodlands and natural resources lay in the town of Rome. So nothing is updated or changed, this is straight out of the comp plan. I think a big part of this is looking at the wetlands, and the natural resources. I think that's very interesting, and maybe focus a little bit of, cause we are, I mean, looking at our rural residential, we have a ton of rural residential over top of that, where we have, a wetland natural resource, and where our future land use map indicated preservation.
So one other question, looking at just drafts 1 and 2.
Yep.
It does look like in draft 2, the legend's updated a little bit. Is that, so is it proposed that draft 2 or 1, or which one's going to, so our current future land use map,
These are,
Okay,
these
so
are tools, this is not anything that'll
no,
be,
I understand,
Okay.
but I'm looking at draft 1, so as we kinda go through all of these drafts, once we get to draft 2, it looks like that legend changed a little bit. I'm just wondering if that was intentional, or if that was just, and it's not like it changed, drastically to affect our review of this future land use map, but that legend, for example, removed cranberry bog, which, is some, indicators over on the right-hand side of these other maps.
so I think that more has to do with, he's working with 2 maps, and we're looking at the map, and it's really the future land use. I'm not sure why cranberry bog, I'm thinking cause it was just taking 2 maps, and overlaying them, I'm not sure
Okay.
why some.
Okay,
Disappeared.
so it isn't, at whatever point we update our future land use map, it isn't being proposed that the legend changes at all for the final, update to the future land use map. It's
Correct.
just, maybe it's just that he, given the layers, I do see that, like, that's not indicated on, draft 2, for example, cranberry bog. Maybe he just highlighted a certain area of the
Mhm.
town, and, the legend, according to that area is what kind of transposed here on the right. I was just wondering if that was, intentional, or if that was, just something that, for purposes of our review, maybe adjusted a little bit, but won't adjust for the future land use map that we would, amend.
Correct, yeah, that was not an intentional erase
Okay.
of, layers, it was just, I think, messing around with the layers to give me the map I was asking for.
Understand? No, I understand, thank you.
Any other questions?
When you overlay R4 and R5, I think in map number 1, it really shows how much of town is in residential already, rural residential already. Which I don't know that you really saw from our current land use map because it was only reflective of R5.
Correct. Well, and, I mean, looking at future land use and existing land use, our existing land use and that overlay of that R5 zoning, I mean, we don't even see residential specs where you would see a house for residential otherwise. Like how we have like a random residential specs in the existing land use map. It's, I mean, the amount of rural residential is far more than just those residential areas.
So Emily, the two main maps to maybe focus on are the future land use map with your markup with suggestions and maybe draft one. Is that accurate? Just to kind of see where, for example, it's proposed to put rural residential versus what's currently rural residential or considered rural residential by R4 and R5 in town.
I believe so, yes. I think, honestly, I think looking at all, 7, 8 maps that are here, they're all very useful in my opinion.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, I'm getting a little lost. So if we look at this draft one,
Yeah,
let's just go up 10th Avenue here, south of Adams Avenue to the west. That's saying that it's rural residential, right?
can you say that again?
West side of 10th Avenue, just south of Adams Ave. So north end of the town, almost central.
Yep, go up. Yep, there you go.
Yes.
And this overlay is what?
On the draft one,
Yeah.
that is taking our future land use map and just plopping rural residential, R4 and R5 on top. So it's showing, it's not the land, so it's zoning on top of that land use.
But is that our current zoning?
It sounds like it's our
Yeah.
current
Current
zoning,
zoning.
our current
Okay.
zoning for R4 and R5
All right, good.
superimposed over our future land use maps to show
Yes.
where the R4 and R5.
Where the R4, where it
currently-
already is.
Yeah, already is.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look at the zoning map, it's all the pink and orange together in one layer on top of our land use.
Okay, thanks.
I just think that's helpful because it shows how much is already in that residential usage, where I don't know that we really reflected that, just showing future land use as R5.
Yeah, our future land use is much different than our zoning map, and it makes you aware of where that is.
I think we're going down the right path though, in that everything that's around the high density developments was, at least on the east side of 13, up for grabs kinda, because it's all forest and outdoor, right? And trying to guide that to be more along the lines of R4 and R5 development if it's gonna get developed.
Low density, certainly that's what
Yeah.
we've heard in the previous meetings, is to keep things low density and
Okay, so what next?
I guess I have a question, I think, for Nick. So at previous meetings, it's either you or Jamie mentioned you can't, I guess, change the land use, which I understand, this is a future land use map that we're looking at, but we wanna put our future land use map in, like, we are changing that map, so like, when it comes to commercial, so like looking at our zoning map and our the future land use map with suggestions.
Okay, so you're looking at our current zoning and future land use map with suggestions, go ahead.
I mean, we are changing, like, we wanna have the future land use map as a map that would guide development, so we are, like, we are changing, like, this rural residential, right? No, that's ag. So this ag square right here, this, the future land use map would guide commercial into that area. So it's not that we can't propose commercial where there's a house, correct? Or propose residential where there's, or propose forestry where there's rural residential.
So, just a couple general comments. I think what you're referencing as far as previous statements is related to what the future land use map amendment does and what it doesn't do. So let's start there. The future land use map is an important document as part of our comprehensive plan. Future land use map amendments that we would do in this committee and ultimately as recommendations to the plan commission and then the town board would be really setting forth the town's vision going forward. That's what it does. What it doesn't do is change the current zoning, okay? And so there's going to be lots of examples where our current zoning doesn't match up with our future land use map. And if nobody changes their current zoning, it's got no effect on them. What it does have an effect on is if they have a current zoning that they want to rezone into something that isn't consistent with our future land use map. In those cases, you have a couple options as the town. You either stick to the future land use map that you have, or you amend it like we've done in the past. Oftentimes where it's not consistent with the whatever current future land use map that we have, they make a request to the plan commission to amend that future land use map. So again, the important piece here is to understand what it does do and what it doesn't do. What we are doing here and what we're not doing here. What we're not doing here is changing anybody's current zoning.
Right.
Make that very clear to anybody watching or asking questions regarding what this committee and ultimately the plan commission of the town is doing. Nobody's changing anybody's current zoning. I don't think that's being proposed at all. What we are doing is updating the future land use map as a planning document to our comprehensive plan that will have an impact on people's property if they were to choose to rezone it at a later point. And so you're really, what you're doing, and I think that's similar to what Supervisor Goldman said, you're setting the vision, right? And as you start to look at some of these maps together, draft one specifically, you can start to see if you're on the right track, right? With what you've got here indicated with previous meetings and where we're heading, potentially with updates to rural residential and commercial business and as we might put that in place, it's not gonna change anybody's zoning, but it will potentially impact their property if they choose to rezone it in the future.
So with that in mind, why would we, because this isn't changing zoning at all, why would we like go around all these residential parcels when we wanna guide commercial development along Alpine Drive? Wouldn't we just put all of that as commercial development?
Well,
Cause I
I'm
think
not
it's
saying-
silly to cut out one parcel
sure, I'm not saying
On
you
the
can't.
future land
on the
use map,
future
you're
land
saying?
use map.
Yeah, she's talking about the future land use map, and I'm not saying you can't, but remember, what they did to get it to residential is they had to amend the future land use map. So you've amended the future land use map, that's why we did this here, so what you're suggesting, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right, would be to then amend it again, you know, reverse from what they did, because some of these, to get it to what they have, had to do an amendment, and I'm not saying, I without looking at the property file, I wouldn't know if the properties that you're talking about here, specifically is referencing that kind of L-shaped yellow there on the future land use map. I don't know if they amended the future land use map to get, to put it into something else, residential. So what what the subcommittee, I think, is trying to do is understand what what our current usages are, and not update or not put in place a future land use map that's just totally inconsistent with some of these current usages, so as to throw all of that off. Now, I'm not saying that they can't. I get what you're asking. I think as you start to get into these specific ones, you probably would want to take a look at the property file and see what exactly the town did. Because we may have amended the future land use map to allow for that to be residential. You'd want to take a look at what that says.
Yeah.
And make sure that we're not just totally, throwing away history there, as it relates to any specific parcels.
But if you, say you make the changes and you leave those as is, can one not argue that, well, if there is to be an amendment, a future amendment to that parcel, that it should fall in line with what's surrounded by?
That's what I was, yeah.
Well, not necessarily, because again, your future land use map is saying that is residential in that example. If you wanted to say that any future amendments need to fall in line with what it's surrounded by, well, that would be an argument for putting that as red on your future land use map.
So for future land use map along Alpine, I could just not be comprehending this, but there's like tiny specks of residential surrounded by commercial. I just don't get why on the future land use map we wouldn't put that as commercial for intended development to follow along commercial. There might be a house there now with a family, but in our zoning map, it's business.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's interesting because it doesn't mesh with our current zoning map. I do see that, and so that's really odd, to say the least, because usually where it's an example like I just talked about, so it's a good point, Emily, because where it's an example like I just talked about, it would be something that you would see these little specks all over our zoning map, because for somebody to rezone it, for example, to residential in a commercial district, they'd, if it wasn't consistent with future land use, they'd have that amendment, and it should be reflected here. So if this is a current zoning map for the town, if this zoning map that we have here is current, like to today, then I would say that that's even more of an argument to, make that all commercial as your vision on your future land use map. Because it's not like you're throwing off any of the current zoning even. It looks like the current zoning, in fact, is largely commercial.
Commercial, yeah.
I mean, ultimately, you're trying to guide development, right? So if we want business down Alpine, which is one of the main corridors in town, yeah, it's sad, but at some point you get businesses moving in and there's a house there, and then eventually they sell and somebody buys it and tears it down and turns it into a business, right? And that's the reality of it. So I'm in favor of making that consistent with the vision, not have it peppered with what we have here, but I'm saying that not knowing all the implications, what that change means.
Well, again, if we update the future land use map, it has zero implications on somebody's current zoning.
Mhm.
Current zoning is what it is. In large part, it's gonna have zero implications on a lot of the current zoning here, because current zoning looks to be, if this is commercial, then it looks to be already commercial, which is odd, to say the least, to have any peppering in those areas, because typically with peppering on your future land use map, it comes because somebody wanted to rezone their parcel and it wasn't consistent with future land use, and so they updated the future land use map on a case-by-case basis, which creates these little specks. So as far as future implications are concerned, there would be very minimal as it relates to the current commercial, because it's already currently commercial and you're just updating that to reflect commercial. There is some that looks like it's the orange and the, I guess that would be like yellowish or lighter orange. There's some of that that, on our map looks like it's the yellow. So that part, there
Those
might
are
be,
R4 zoning.
well, yeah, so,
South of Alpine is R4,
Mhm.
north is R1.
so, I mean, there are potentially some, implications on those in the, in the event that somebody wanted to rezone those. But what it would really allow for is if they wanted to rezone, they could do so to commercial and be consistent with the future land use map. If they wanted to rezone to something else, they'd need to do a future land use map, amendment request. And then the town would consider that on a case-by-case basis.
Which at that point, we do what we should be doing all along, is use our future land use map to guide us and potentially deny that request.
Bingo. That's right. You're absolutely right.
And that also underlines, maybe just more of a general statement to the amendment process, it also underlines the fact that when you get to the point where you're considering amending your future land use map, it's important to get the word out, what you're proposing to amend the future land use map to, right? So, so that public hearing can be, providing input to proposed amendments. But yes, once you update your future land use map, any future requests, to amend your future land use map, so if they're looking to rezone to something outside of what is, indicated on your future land use map, would require an amendment and could be denied. And if it's denied, as not consistent with the comprehensive plan, then it would be a denial of the rezone. And after 2011, you need to be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Wouldn't it be, I mean, I don't know, wouldn't it be beneficial for those houses in there that we wanna do commercial? Wouldn't it be beneficial for those people that presently own that house, if it was, rezoned commercial according to the future land mass, because wouldn't their property be able to sell maybe for more money because of the commercial zoning on it?
We're not changing their current zoning, so we're not rezoning.
But they could,
But potentially,
Request.
that would give
They
them
could
the
request.
ability to rezone in the future to commercial, yes.
But all those houses along Alpine are already commercial. They're zoned.
They are,
Yeah.
yes.
Most, the
Most, yes.
R1 and R4
That-
aren't, but
yeah.
the
It's a
specs are.
very similar situation off of Anawa on the south portion of Rome Town Center, on the south portion of like where Multi-Cran is. That's homes all in there, and they're commercial. I mean,
A single-family dwelling is permitted use in commercial B1 district.
but just north of us, there's a property that there's a home, and you can see the sign for sale clearly listed as available for commercial. It's commercially zoned. It has a home on it, but
And that goes to Sharon's point, right?
Yep.
I mean, it does potentially make it more marketable, yes. But, I mean, that would only be in the situation where somebody wanted it to be.
I
mean,
understand.
but if they're currently zoned commercial, it really does justify what Emily's saying, which is, why do we have these flecks all over when they're not even consistent with the current zoning anyway? And the vision was commercial anyway, so.
Yeah, I don't see a point of putting specs in a future land use map that, I mean, it can show what's currently there, like all Lake District is all residential, but putting a random yellow speck in the middle of forestry, that's not gonna, I don't know. I mean, it's there probably because of a comp plan
Yes.
amendment,
Over
but,
time, it's unavoidable, right?
yeah,
Where a town approves future land use map amendments on a case-by-case basis after, so you can have a really, really great, set in stone one, and then that doesn't necessarily bind future, bodies, and so as those come in, it's gonna spec up over time. That's inevitable. I mean, even if you're saying this is it, right here, things change over time, and so,
there can't be a precedent because you allowed some of these specs to rezone, and somebody that wants to either keep their zoning or they can't use that as a precedent?
Well, again, they get to keep their zoning, so we're not changing anything with their zoning. And so, if they wanna keep their zoning, that's,
But if somebody wants to build where these little yellow specks are,
Mhm.
and that we think should be commercial, they don't necessarily have a case to do that if our future land use map, if we put that as residential.
it depends on.
They
yeah.
can't go and say, well, you
I see your
allowed,
point.
what?
I see your point.
But
You
yeah,
allowed somebody else to put, residential, and now you're saying that, cause it's commercial,
Mhm.
I mean, would they legally be able to fight something like that? Because I agree with Dan, I mean, I don't, and I don't know much about this, but I just don't understand why, you know, all these specs were allowed in here. And if it was done in the past, what can we do to prevent it happening in the future?
So a current body really can't bind into perpetuity future bodies, so that's the answer to your last question. As far as, your example about somebody that maybe wants to build residential, for example, you'd look at your permitted uses, and I think R1, single family, is permitted in commercial, isn't it? Isn't that what you
A
just said?
single family dwelling is permitted use in commercial,
Okay,
yes.
so, no lawsuit needed, right? I mean, that would be something that they'd be allowed to do, but what they'd be allowed to do is what their current zoning is, right? You know, the only time this triggers is if somebody says, for example, you know, I'll just give an example that kind of goes the opposite way, right? That somebody has one of these specs, these yellow specs, and they're like, wait a second, I want to be commercial. Currently, they'd have to do an amendment to this comp plan to do that, because currently, their future land use map is residential. If they wanted to, well, that's not even a good example, because
Is it?
they're
Because-
currently commercial.
Currently, they're commercial.
This whole, it's so strange, because the peppering isn't because we did case by case in this example, because we didn't. The current zoning apparently is, if this is a current map, the current zoning is
Allowed.
commercial.
Current as of
It's a
May,
moot
yeah.
point. It's, all we're doing is updating, if anything, we're updating the future land use map to be consistent with our zoning in that area.
And we wouldn't necessarily have to show the peppering, because it is zoned commercial.
Well, and that's, so people that did do the comp plan amendment and got their little spec in the middle of forestry,
Mhm.
do we need to keep those as our residential spec, or can we just put it back to forestry?
Well, if you put it back to forestry, let's kind of talk that through. So their current zoning would still be residential.
Yeah,
If they wanted to rezone that for some reason in the future, the future land use map would show on their property forestry again.
okay,
So they could rezone to forestry, or they could ask for an amendment to the future land use map.
The qualifier being, is it residential or rural residential? Cause if you put their spec as residential, or say it's something bigger than just a acre parcel, then we run the risk of, oh, can I subdivide this and all that kind of fun stuff, right? That we don't wanna do.
and I think that's why we're trying, at the previous meetings, we said rural residential all surrounding our residential, cause then it's that 5 acre minimum. And I think that protects us a little bit from that dense development.
Yeah, cause we will still have development. That's,
Yeah.
it's marketable land, it's usable land. I think that's the density of it. Cause I don't know that we will ever be able to truly stop people wanting to buy 40 acres and build a house. I mean, that's,
Well, I mean, that's ideal in some cases, right?
yeah.
But, I mean, later on, we've got discussion with somebody who wants to put in a true subdivision, right? Which I don't think we're gonna see that many requests for something like that, but obviously, we don't wanna go put that in some random area of town that we're trying to preserve, so.
Well, and I think it's one thing to, somebody says, oh, I wanna put my rural residential Like, let's pretend they buy over by Fiesta Drive, they buy 15 acres, and you're like, I wanna change this residential to rural residential. Not sure why they'd wanna do that, but you could say, I mean, we look at our future land use map, and it says residential. I'm not sure why we would say no to rural residential, but those minor changes would be different than somebody going in the middle of forestry and saying, I wanna rezone to build a big subdivision.
And when those rezone requests come in that are inconsistent with the comp plan, the plan commission can ask what their reason for rezoning is. So you can do some of that analysis as you consider those, and, you know, maybe they are looking to put in a, true subdivision, perhaps, you know, and maybe it's deemed appropriate there, well, then you might update the comp plan, future land use map accordingly and allow the rezone. So, this does allow a transitional, kind of buffer around your higher density residential, as you've proposed it on this marked up future land use map. And, you know, really back to Emily's original point, there isn't a real problem with taking some of these peppers out, particularly in areas where that would be actually inconsistent right now with the current zoning. You should probably take these peppers out anyway and just make it consistent with what you have currently in there anyway.
Can I just ask then for the map that we've marked up with the suggested changes, going back to the block numbers, so we've blocked, 4, 3, 2, with the blue lines for outdoor rec. Given when you look at map number 1 and how much of that is already rural residential, do we wanna keep those squares as rural residential and the rest as forestry?
Why?
No, I think we don't. I think we wanna make them rural, remove the rural residential and leave it forest
Okay,
and recreational. That was the whole intent,
okay,
so that we would be removing what's zoned or what's suggested there now and
So
making
then-
it forestry.
future land use, when it would go to, and I'd have to look what's allowed for outdoor recreation, but we would be going back to outdoor recreation in all of those squares for future land use.
I thought that was our intent.
I thought so too.
Gotta say, when you really start looking at these maps, it is kinda surprising how much of the developable space in town is developed already.
Yes,
Or used in some manner other than forestry.
yes. When the overlay went on it, I was surprised too.
What do we think about the west side of town here? We've got a bunch of residential peppered in. We've got, if we look at this zoning, what color is that? R4, mostly? And some ag mixed in there. Should that just be rural residential on the future land use, cause it all is already?
Well, I think that's what we would be suggesting is going back to the numbers of the squares, number 1, 2, 3, and 4, would it be either outdoor recreation or forestry? Would be, even though there's a bunch of rural residential, moving future land use back, but then your squares right below it, around, 8th, 9th, and back, just west of State Highway 13 would be rural residential.
I think he's looking
I
over
think,
at Romo
he's
Woods.
talking about
Yeah.
this
Oh,
spot right here.
opposite side.
Yeah,
Opposite side.
west.
I agree with what you just said about that side, yeah, but
The chunk that gets really close to the water.
Yeah,
everything around Roma Woods really, and that, what is that, squares
Those are,
two?
R2, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. that's all
R2 is
R2.
that little Romo Woods and a little bit
Yeah,
under.
but everything around it, this is,
All of that's R4 surrounding that.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of ag and forestry.
so do we want it to be predominantly R4 in that area? If it is already, I'm assuming it's in use as that currently.
Yeah,
Might
there's
not
a
be,
little
but-
ag in there, but there,
Yeah.
most of it is, I would say, rural residents. The other pieces you have, if you're gonna do that commercial all along Alpine, I it kinda makes sense that you would do commercial and housing, you wouldn't go from commercial to outdoor rec.
Yeah. It's a good point.
I think what you've seen
So it's talking about
south
could be
of
this
Alpine,
right
in that area that we have marked for rural residential,
Yes.
certainly
don't
with
have
the
a problem
zoning
with that.
request that we have tonight, would be just residential, not rural.
Yeah, which
That
would
would-
be consistent with the residential right below it. I mean, it would be rural, but it'd be,
Well, and it's consistent with what's directly to the west of it already.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I
The only
didn't consider
caveat being we're adding more high density development, but
But it is adjacent to,
Right.
you know, your higher density, it's not,
It's appropriately placed.
yeah, it's not off.
It's not,
we're
it's
talking
not
about
up
that thing
here in
at the
Forest.
next meeting.
Oh, that's gonna be over here. Yeah.
I could certainly see all around then Akron and 15th north of Alpine, having that all be the rural residential, but then south of Alpine and north of Rapids Trail making that residential, with the exception of what we would have in there for commercial, existing commercial.
Can you repeat that?
So, all around Akron, this would all be
Yeah,
rural residential, commercial, residential,
yeah, okay. Oh, residential.
not rural residential,
I agree.
residential.
Yeah, I was looking at that, I agree of having all of that, cause that's dedicating, I mean, in relative to the town, very little area is more dense development, but it's consistent with the development around it, considering you have R1, a rezone for tonight from this forestry to R1, and then, what else?
That big chunk of pink in there too is, that was given to the town and has to stay as park development, so.
Yeah,
And what corner is that, the 14th? 14th and Alpine?
13th.
13th and 14th, yep,
Oh, yeah, you're right.
14th would be the next one over.
And that, like looking at Rome Town Center, if we want dense development anywhere, we want it around Rome Town Center.
Yep. It's where we have one of our very few multifamily zonings.
Yeah.
What is the big chunk of public, semi-public off 14th?
It was land donated to the town. I think the history there is it,
Just north of Rapids Trail?
just north of Rapids Trail, it was land donated to the town. Woodlands Church sits on that parcel because it had to be used for civic or community use. So, I think 5 acres is Woodlands Church. But at some point, I think it was part of a Lake Arrowhead plot that came back to the town as a
Yeah,
donation.
aren't there gardens out there too?
Yep, there's community gardens.
Right.
Yeah, but we just recently had looked at the deed for that development because of some things that had come through plan commission, and it has to be used for park purposes, it's not developable.
Yeah, there's very specific restrictions on development there.
Yep,
And what is that blue sliver that's right next to that?
R1 zoning.
I know, but what is in there?
I think one house,
I don't know what's in there.
I think I think that's all one owner, one house.
I can look it up.
So obviously he wouldn't be impacted anyway if you're gonna go with all R1 in that area.
If it was just residential,
Right.
yeah, it would not be impacted, he'd be
This is the
residential.
public, where
He would just be
the
marked
church is.
yellow on the
That's
future
what
land
they're
use map.
talking about first. Now he's asking about that.
Okay. I'm on the wrong map.
So on this map, it would be, here's the,
Okay.
and then the blue
There
sliver
are
would be
3
here.
parcels that are R1 zoning in that little blue sliver.
And they owned by the same person or different people?
They're all different owners.
Hmm.
Looks like 2 of them have houses on them.
I know you were looking and then I distracted you, but that outdoor recreation must allow
Oh, yeah.
for, because that looks like in the future land use map what our PUD is, so it has to allow for some development.
There's a handful of things. Fire detection structure, fishing and boating, directional signs, private recreational camping with a limit of 2 camping units, harvesting of wild crops such as, it lists natural plants, soil and water conservation practices, wildlife and nature preserves, open shelter for public use, and non-residential buildings or structures used for raising wildlife and fish, the practice of forestry and research in or the rehabilitation of natural resources.
So I think that's the wrong color.
There are some conditional uses
Okay.
that still do not,
Yeah, I mean, it's come up in the past where that's been, a challenge for people that have owned that kind of property that maybe wanted to put a home on it, because that doesn't allow for the home.
I don't think it's properly on our future land use.
I don't think it's the right color.
Yeah, outdoor shooting range, campground, other signs, communication tower, governmental public service signs, utility, and hydroelectric dam, power plant flowage. Not golf course,
Well, in the residential
or
development.
residential, or any development essentially at all. Any of the development that is there.
Okay, so let's fix that too.
Yeah,
What?
I mean, it just was recently
Business?
rezoned. No, we'd have to look what when we did the comp plan change, what it got changed to. I mean, it just this year, that one piece got rezoned for the for where Sedge is. We'd have to look to see what it said on it. But then my feeling would be the rest of square number 23 and anything else that would be part of the original TID plan should go to that for future land use, because there's the potential for all of that to be a part of the PUD in the future.
What would you change it to?
I think we'd look at, what the last comp plan change was to, cause, oh, are you looking right now?
I'm looking.
I don't know why I'm thinking outdoor recreation.
I don't know why I'm thinking that too, but when I get to the right month of public notices, I can.
For some reason, I'm thinking it was that because of what it is around it.
Yeah, and it makes sense not
'Cause
looking at the,
didn't they do a PUD with it? Or not yet?
I was not here.
They did a PUD with Lido, yeah.
Yeah, so anything
Oh.
that they did the PUD with, I think they just changed that to outdoor recreation.
And hearing outdoor recreation, it makes sense without looking at the town code. But reading town code, it doesn't line up.
Yeah, but they did a PUD with it, so
I know,
that's the uniqueness of it, is that a PUD is used in those cases where there's a mix that on paper, may work once they have the whole plan, but, you know, hearing those uses just initially may not seem like they would. be
Yeah,
all
even
that.
Arrowhead Golf Course is listed as this,
Yeah, that's true.
both of them. And Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Syracuse is. We do a lot of, changes. That's why I'm looking for what we had, that hearing notice.
This is Syracuse.
This is the shooting range.
Way off.
But if we did change it to,
This is Syracuse.
that future,
That's Syracuse,
if that is what it was put into its
Isn't it?
outdoor rec with the PUD,
I think.
then I would say everything else that is part of the potential TID district would just get changed to that for future land use.
Do we need a different color?
We might need a different color. Yeah, it was outdoor rec. Even the there were some properties that were in rural residence and they got changed to outdoor recreation
No, that's Syracuse.
with the Lido development, so. It is
Largely because of
I
the,
think that's a park.
cause of the PUD.
Yeah.
I mean, the other, if you wanted to add a color, you know, that's where you can start talking about mixed use or something along those lines that can
Isn't that a park right there?
really lend to appropriate areas for PUD, but
Pretty sure.
you know, so many times where somebody says, and it doesn't happen often, but when they do say that, you know, this would be something that we'd like to do a planned unit development, it's gonna be so dependent on the plan that they bring, the project plan, and what their plan for the development is, that you really wanna approach it on a case-by-case basis, and potentially that would be a situation where you would be open to amending the comp plan to support it, is only my thought on it.
And I apologize, I should have been watching the time closer, so it's 3:23, this has been a really interesting conversation, the maps are really helpful. I think, north of Alpine, we're feeling pretty good about our changes there. South of Alpine, south of Alpine and east of State Highway 13, pretty good, but maybe just a little bit more discussion in that wetland area for next meeting.
Yeah.
So let us bring back another of our series of maps with those changes on it. But getting close, in the next meeting, we should discuss about how we reveal the map, what's our process to discuss and get input and do map approval. With that, we would go to item number 9, discussion of possible action, referral of any recommendation to zoning code amendments to plan commission. Letter A, discussion of possible referral to a future agenda, review potential draft language for zoning district requirements regarding canopies.
All right, so over the last several meetings, we've explored potential updates to our zoning ordinance related to certain accessory structures in residential and lake districts. As we explored options and really looked at what some of the other communities are doing, what our code has for regulations regarding those structures, we, at the last meeting, decided to propose or review at least updates to the ordinance in a few different areas. Specifically, those areas are adding certain definitions to our definition section. Second would be updating Article 3, specifically Section 360-10, related to accessory uses and structures, to include language requiring accessory structures be maintained structurally and in good repair, allowing canopy structures on a temporary use, which is a change from our current regulations, and allowing gazebos up to a certain size. So with that intro, what you have been provided today is some proposed wording to our ordinance in those two areas. So first, if we start with section 360-5, that's the definition section. You're going to see definitions for a number of items: canopies, carports with two different definitions, specifically differentiating between the land use type of carport and the freestanding / detached carport, gazebos and pergolas. I would just make a general note to the canopy one that we had a definition. That was one of the few items that we did have a definition for, just not in the definition section. We actually had the definition located in that 360-10. That definition, though, did have it including ports, which, of course, we're discussing not doing that. Largely, the definition as it was existed in our ordinance, it was just carried over to our definition section, but taking out that port piece and including carports specifically as a defined item. So we can review, if you'd like, each of those definitions. Otherwise, I'd be looking for some input if anybody has input on the definitions.
I think you guys did a great job on definitions. My concerns come later where we have some
Yep.
legacy language relating to canopies in the Lake District. But
Okay, so then, so certainly if anybody else, I'll pause first and ask if anybody else has any comments or thoughts on the definitions. Then I'm going to put that aside for now, and of course, I'd ask that if you do review those over the next month and have any thoughts on different language, or you review that definition and you feel that it's missing something, that you please let me know, and we can get that updated for the next meeting, and I'll explain why this really does need to go to the next meeting in a moment. The 360-10 section. So just kind of going down the red wording that's been added. First in A, that's going to be the language that references structural maintenance and appearance requirements. You'll note that I put that for all accessory structures. I think that is going to be something that's pertinent for all. I don't think we want to necessarily say that we consider that important for one accessory structure and not another. I think general maintenance and appearance requirements are broadly enough applied to accessory structures to really apply to all of them. B, that references structures not allowed in non-agricultural districts prior to the principal structure. You'll see that the way that wording is, it allows a gazebo that is less than 150 square feet to be constructed in a non-agricultural, so residential districts that would be allowed. If it's above the 150 square feet, then it would need to have a principal structure on the property first. You'll also see that pergolas have been added to what is not allowed before the principal structure. So to construct a pergola, you have to have the principal structure on the property.
So I contacted Adams County Planning and Zoning with this. Their only concern, they would not allow anything over 150 square feet without a primary or principal
Without
structure.
a principal structure.
Yep,
So-
which is why we added that into here.
Yep, so we're consistent across the board there, so there isn't confusion when somebody makes a call, maybe to the county first, when maybe the better first call would be here. We're just consistent across the board there.
so permitted, but not larger than 150 without a principal structure.
That's
Correct.
correct. Yep, and then, and maybe I'll just jump to the punchline at the that I was going to say for the very end. Just remember though that we have the regulations that we had previously discussed regarding number of accessory structures and that.
Right.
Those are going to need to be reevaluated a little bit. Not because the numbers are going to change, but because some of the things that we listed as accessory structures that are allowed are going to change depending on
this.
what's done here. So my intention is to have this conversation here. For your next meeting, it's all going to be brought as one package so you can see it all in a cohesive package and how that interplays with each other. I just thought for this purpose, we'd start here and then I'd kind of roll that all together. So, correct, Dan, that would be allowed, those gazebos would be allowed before the principal structure. Okay, then going down to canopies. So canopies now are listed as really two spots. First, canopy structures are allowed on a temporary basis with time limitations, except, and then we have language for permanent permanent canopies in those Lake District and recorded residential subdivisions where it's atop a boat lift. So that was previously it's been language in our ordinance. I didn't adjust that, but certainly we can discuss that. My intention was not to remove something like that when we hadn't discussed it yet. So I left that in there. I don't know if we want to pause there and maybe discuss just the canopy language that we have here first. See if that's something that we're okay with, or if we want to adjust it further.
So my concerns were that continues to prohibit canopy as newly defined within the Lake District, the way it's written, correct? Ignoring the whole boat lift thing. Because now we have a definition for canopies, right? So if you want to have a pop-up thing for your event for the weekend, you technically can't have it based on the way this is written.
That'd be temporary.
No, that's temporary and you can go up to 20 times.
Yep, so what we did was we,
Right.
20 days.
I think what we
20
did
well,
was,
20 days.
at the last meeting, my notes reflected that we were adjusting canopies to just be temporary.
Right, which is, I'm in agreement with, but when you read this, in the Lake District, and any recorded residential subdivision, canopies may only be used atop a boat lift.
But that's the permanent.
Permanently.
So that is A underneath two, which is permanent use. So this language
Okay.
sets for temporary use, which is gonna be one.
So that's not overriding.
Mm-mm.
No.
Separate.
So the only permanent use of a canopy is what is in A.
So now that we have an actual definition for canopies, does the fabric top of a boat lift need to be defined as something else to avoid confusion? I'm not trying to make a mess, I'm just asking the question.
What?
What would they be?
Do we just take
Okay.
that part out of there? 'Cause it's not,
I guess,
we don't permit boat lifts at all. That's not our,
right,
But I think the point that Supervisor Goldman's making is that we may not permit them, but if somebody has a canopy over top their boat lift and we just remove this, I think then that kind of forces us back to saying, canopies are only allowed as a temporary use. My only thought to that, Dan, is that I think the reading of the definition for canopy would cover that canopy over the boat lift. I think this is being specific with when it would be allowed, the only time it would be allowed, which is on top of boat lift. I don't think that this causes problems with how it's proposed. It's just basically saying that a canopy, as it's defined, and I think that does fit under our definition, is only allowed on a permanent basis if it's atop a boat lift in Lake District and recorded subdivisions.
Okay.
So I don't think that causes a contrast there. Any other questions regarding canopies before I move on? Okay, then finally, you'll see a reference there on the bottom. Carports that are freestanding and detached are not permitted in any zoning district. So that is why we specifically separated the land use type of carports, which I think Emily did a great job with pictures showing what those structural, attached to the principal structure kind of carports would be, and the difference between that and your detached, carports.
She found some very nice carports.
Yeah, she did. Well, and I think the main
Very nice
point,
cars underneath them.
I think the main point is that, those land use carports are going to have UDC requirements, right? And that's a big part of that.
Yeah.
It's not
And so I
freestanding.
think that's why
It's not
that would be
freestanding.
allowed as a land use, right?
Right.
Versus, a carport that
That's the
is,
difference. That's what this is
maybe
defining.
freestanding like these lesser cars.
The questions we.
Did you do that intentionally?
Yeah, the questions we have received around canopies, I would say, are much more focused around that carport freestanding.
I'd say 100%.
Yeah, 100%. That
Yeah.
they
I would
are
think
around
so,
the bowl,
yeah.
Or
Yeah.
And so they're not allowed, period,
Correct.
once this passes. What about pre-existing?
If they are permitted, they'd be non-conforming. If they're not permitted, they still need to be
Then-
removed.
Oh,
Yep.
And we've
Okay.
Emily's done the research on when that actually went into code for
April
If-
27th, 2007.
when those conversations
Good.
come up. So
There's a really big camper living under a really big carport that we need to look into.
Just send me the address.
yeah.
So,
I have a list.
well, even if it's not being used for a car, if it's a freestanding structure that looks like a carport, it would not be allowed, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
and all
Yeah,
the
this
more
one-
reason why having those definitions is really important.
that's right.
And so that was one thing that I think as we reviewed this, early on, we identified really a gap in our ordinance with not having clear definitions to that and leaving it open to interpretation one way or the other. I think having clear definitions is gonna help us going forward. Again, so unless anybody has any, additional thoughts to this, what I would propose would be to build this all into a single document that has what we previously looked at, along with this, as a proposed amendment, so you can see how that all works together. We can have one more chance to review it, and then if it looks acceptable, then you would be recommending that on to the plan commission. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Okay. There's no other discussion on that item. We would move to dates and items for future meetings, the next agenda items. So we would have back both 8 and 9 for next meeting.
Yeah, we might adjust the language for 9 a little bit,
Okay,
just because it'll build in all of it now. So we'll probably just update that language just a bit.
anything else from any of the subcommittee members? And then next meeting date and time, tentatively December 13th, 2022 at 2:30. I can't believe it's already gonna be December. Does that time frame work immediately before board in December for everyone?
Before plan.
Before plan? It's hard to switch sometimes.
I'm here.
Okay. Hearing no objection, then I would call the meeting adjourned at 3:39 PM. Thank you.